We have dopamine associated with motivation, drive, and pursuit, and to some extent focus. We have epinephrine and norepinephrine associated with energy, of having a forward center of mass, mentally and or physically. We have serotonin, which is associated with a peaceful, content, sated state of being. And we have acetylcholine, which is associated with focus, and in particular focus as it relates to learning and encoding new information. So let's say you want to be more motivated. You want to be more in pursuit of goals, and you want to have more energy and to be more focused. There are many ways to go about that. In fact, there's a near infinite cloud of opportunities, everything from prescription drugs to illicit drugs, which I certainly do not recommend, supplements, nutrition. You can listen to particular music. You can do all sorts of cognitive, behavioral, nutritional supplementation tricks, or you can just understand that what you're really after are increases in dopamine above baseline that you control. And there are ways to control them that are quite potent. And science tells us which tools are going to be the most potent and the most versatile for you. Let's say you want to increase dopamine for sake of increasing motivation. The first thing to do is to understand what the natural behavioral tools are for increasing dopamine and to do those as consistently as possible. Again, these are tools that you'll want to do nearly every day, if not every day. And we come to sunlight and, I should say, not just the desire to, but really the need for viewing the maximum amount of sunlight that one can reasonably get, given schedules and locations in the world, time of year, etc., in the early part of the day. Within the first hour of waking, ideally, but certainly in the first 3 hours of your day, you are going to want to maximize sunlight exposure to your eyes. Never look at the sun or any other light so bright that it's painful to look at. And yes, of course, blinking is fine, but no, take sunglasses off, go outside once the sun is out and get some natural light in your eyes. And if it's appropriate, or I should say in a way that's appropriate, maximize the amount of sunlight exposure to your skin, but please don't get burned. Please do wear sunscreen if you're prone to getting burned. Typically, early day sunlight is not going to burn you, at least not most people, unless you're extremely fair-skinned. So don't get burned. Do what you need to in order to protect yourself from burn. What does that do? Well, it sets in motion a number of different biological cascades. Some are very fast. There are fast actions of sunlight that will trigger, for instance, dopamine release from different parts of your brain and your endocrine system. And we now know that it increases levels of genes related to thyroid hormone and actually increases certain dopamine receptors. Sunlight exposure can actually increase the amount of so-called DRD4. This is a particular type of dopamine receptor, the dopamine receptor 4. The genes for dopamine receptor 4 are actually under photic control. So if you get sunlight exposure to your eyes, and it does have to be to your eyes in the early part of the day, you increase the amount of dopamine receptor that you have, which allows whatever circulating dopamine happens to be there to have a greater effect on motivation, and I should say also on mood and feelings of being in pursuit and generally in craving and pursuit of things in life. Now, there's another way to increase the effect of whatever dopamine happens to be circulating in your brain and body. And this again relates to increasing the number or the efficacy of the receptors for dopamine. Now, here we're not talking about the dopamine receptor 4, but a different category of dopamine receptors, the D2 and D3 receptors, which are expressed multiple places in your brain and body and bind dopamine, meaning dopamine parks in them like a parking spot and allows dopamine to generally increase the activity of the neurons and cells that express those dopamine receptors. How do you do that? Well, turns out that regular ingestion of caffeine at safe and appropriate levels of about 100 to 250 milligrams is going to increase the number of D2 and D3 dopamine receptors. When you drink caffeine, it's going to increase your levels of adrenaline and so-called epinephrine, which will increase your energy levels. It's going to decrease levels of something called adenosine, which builds up while you're sleepy. It's going to make you feel less sleepy, more alert, more energetic. That's sort of obvious. But what's less obvious is that it's increasing the number and efficacy of dopamine receptors so that whatever dopamine happens to be around in your system is going to have more of a potent effect.